Narcissists, despite all their grandiosity and dominance, are profoundly dependent on others to keep their inner world from collapsing. They create an illusion of strength, of independence, of superiority, but beneath that carefully crafted mask lies a fragile, starving ego. They don't love themselves as much as they obsessively need others to love them, to validate them, to reflect back the image they want to believe is real. You weren't just a person to them. You were a mirror, a supplier, a source of psychological oxygen. And when you walked away, you didn't just leave. They lost their lifeline. See, narcissists don't attach to people in the way healthy individuals do. They don't form deep reciprocal bonds. They form dependencies. What they are after isn't companionship. It's not intimacy. What they crave is emotional supply, the constant stream of attention, admiration, affirmation, and even conflict that keeps their self-image inflated. Every compliment, every text back, every emotional reaction you gave them, whether it was in love or in pain, fed the monster they were trying to keep alive inside. This is the twisted irony. Even your hurt was useful to them. Your heartbreak was proof that they mattered. When you cried, when you begged, when you tried to make it work. They felt powerful, they felt wanted, they felt significant. Because for a narcissist, it's not about love. It's about relevance, it's about control, it's about being the axis around which someone else's world spins, and you, your presence, your attention, your energy, gave them that sense of dominance. You were their emotional battery, constantly charging their sense of superiority. But here's the brutal truth they didn't expect. Emotional supply is not infinite. People break, people burn out, people wake up. And once you woke up, once you saw the pattern, once you stopped reacting, stopped chasing, stopped giving them what they were silently demanding, that's when their world started to unravel. When you left, you pulled the plug. You turned off the faucet. You became silent, and that silence was deafening to them. Because now, there's no one to reflect them. No one to admire them, no one to hate them enough to make them feel important. The emotional chaos they once controlled is gone, and what's left is just them alone, with nothing but their own empty thoughts. They wander post-breakup, trying to recreate the feeling. They might reach out. They might find someone new, but it's never the same, because narcissists don't just miss people. They miss the way they felt when they were with you. And that's not something they can recreate with just anyone. The way you looked at them, the way you tried to understand them, the way you gave them chance after chance, it fed their illusion of superiority. It gave them the fantasy that they were worthy, desirable, godlike. And when you stopped, when you walked, you ripped away the curtain and left them standing there, exposed and unremarkable. Now, every silent day is a reminder that the performance is over. They check their phone. Nothing. They post online. No reaction from you. They tell stories to mutual friends, hoping you'll hear and come running. But you don't. You've evolved. You've reconnected with your real self. The one who was buried beneath the guilt, the gaslighting, the manipulation. And they can feel that. Even from afar, they can feel that you've taken back your power, that your energy no longer belongs to them, and that is what haunts them, because it's not the breakup that destroys a narcissist. It's the disappearance of the supply. It's the lack of drama, the lack of begging, the lack of noise. They can't regulate their own emotions. They can't soothe their own insecurities. Without you providing that emotional feedback loop, they spiral. Some dive into rebound relationships. Others stalk your social media, looking for signs of pain or longing. But what they're really doing is searching for proof that they still matter, that they still exist in your world. And when they realize they don't, that you've healed, that you've grown, that you've stopped feeding the machine, they're forced to confront a terrifying reality. You were the one keeping them afloat, and now their sinking control is the lifeblood of a narcissist's identity. They don't just want it, they need it like oxygen, because without control they're exposed, vulnerable, irrelevant, and nothing terrifies a narcissist more than the realization that they were never truly in control to begin with. They mistake obedience for power, silence for submission, and attention for admiration. But when you walk away, when you finally break free from their manipulative orbit, you don't just disrupt the relationship. You shatter the illusion that they were ever the one in charge. See, the narcissist's sense of control isn't real. It's manufactured through manipulation, coercion, guilt, and emotional sleight of hand. They rewrite the narrative in real time. They gaslight you into questioning your own reality, your own judgment, your own memory. They spin stories where they're always the misunderstood genius, the victim, the savior. They orchestrate subtle power plays, one moment affectionate, the next dismissive, keeping you off balance so that you're always trying to earn their approval, always trying to avoid their disapproval. That dynamic creates the illusion that they hold the reins, that they dictate the terms, that they are the center around which everything else must revolve. But here's the part they never calculate for. Control isn't sustainable when it's built on delusion. You can only gaslight someone for so long before they begin to notice the inconsistencies. You can only keep someone small for so long before they remember how big they used to be. And when that day comes, when you see through the tactics, when you stop explaining yourself, stop apologizing for your boundaries, stop entertaining the theatrics, that's when their carefully constructed power structure begins to crumble. They don't see it coming. That's what makes it so devastating. They believe the control is absolute. They believe you're too dependent, too confused, too broken to leave. And because they believe their own lies, your exit becomes a catastrophic blow, not just to their pride, but to their entire self-concept. You weren't supposed to wake up. You weren't supposed to find the door. And you sure as hell weren't supposed to walk through it with your head high and your heart intact, but you did. And that act alone rewrites the entire story they told themselves about who they were in the relationship. Now they're left staring at a broken mirror. No more reflections of power, no more applause for their manipulations, no more emotional reactions to feed off of. What remains is silence. And in that silence, they're forced to confront something they've avoided their whole lives, their own powerlessness. They aren't in control. They never were. The reality is, they were never leading. You were just letting them believe they were. You tolerated, you forgave, you gave the benefit of the doubt, but that wasn't weakness. That was strength restrained, compassion misused, and once it's gone, it doesn't come back. So they scramble, they reach out, not because they love you, but because they're desperate to resurrect the illusion. They want the leash back in their hand. They want to see if they still have influence. Will you respond? Will you react? Will you answer the call just one more time? It's not about reconciliation. It's about verification. They need to know they still matter, but when you don't answer, when your silence speaks louder than their games, that's when the internal collapse begins, because the narcissist can't cope with being powerless. They can't self-regulate. They've never learned how to build authentic connection or earn real trust. All they know is control, and when that control is gone, they spiral. Rage, panic, obsession. It all surfaces. They might smear you to others, rewrite history, or jump into another relationship to reestablish dominance. But deep down, they know something they'll never say out loud. If they were really in control, you'd still be there. You wouldn't have walked. You wouldn't have grown. You wouldn't have become someone they can no longer intimidate. And that realization cuts deeper than any wound they've ever inflicted on you, because it proves something they've always feared. Their power wasn't real. It was borrowed. It was fragile. It only existed because you allowed it. And now, without your participation, they are left alone with the one thing they can't manipulate. The truth narcissists live in a world built on illusion, a fantasy that they are exceptional, chosen, superior, above criticism, and beyond accountability. This isn't just arrogance, it's survival. Deep down, buried beneath the performance, is a profound fear of being nothing special, of being just like everyone else, so they construct a persona. They exaggerate their achievements, inflate their talents, and demand admiration without ever doing the hard work that would actually earn it. They need to be seen as rare because the idea of being ordinary is unbearable. But when you leave, when you no longer reflect their grandiosity back to them, something terrifying happens. They're exposed, and not as a villain, not as a monster. Something worse in their mind. They're exposed as mediocre. To a narcissist, mediocrity is the ultimate insult. Because their entire identity hinges on being admired, not respected, not loved, admired. They want to be envied. They want people to look at them and feel small by comparison. That's why they choose partners who shine, people with real depth, people with talent, resilience, compassion, insight, people who have the very qualities they lack, but want to absorb by association. When you gave them your time, your loyalty, your energy, you validated their story. You made them feel exceptional, because if someone like you saw value in them, then it must be true. But the moment you withdraw that attention, the illusion begins to fracture. Without you feeding the narrative, there's no one left to play the supporting role in their personal mythology. And they're left with what they've spent their whole lives running from: ordinary humanity. Flaws, limits, emptiness. They're not the smartest person in the room. They're not the most charming or the most successful or the most magnetic. They're just another person who failed to connect. Another person who couldn't sustain what they started. Another person who drove someone away not because they were too much, but because they were incapable of love that wasn't about control. That's the sting. That's the wound. You leaving doesn't just make them feel rejected. It makes them feel exposed. The grand narrative begins to unravel. Others notice. They start asking questions. What happened? Why did someone so strong, so kind, so giving walk away? And the narcissist scrambles to protect the story. They blame you. They smear you. They twist the facts, but behind the scenes, in the quiet hours, they're confronted with the part they can't spin. You saw them for who they really were, and it wasn't enough to make you stay. And that's the moment everything shifts, because narcissists don't understand love without performance. They don't understand that real connection is built on vulnerability, not spectacle. And when the lights go out, when the attention fades, they have nothing left to offer. No substance, no foundation, just a hollow identity held together by borrowed traits and stolen attention. That's why they panic when you leave, because now they have to look in the mirror without your reflection propping them up. And what they see staring back isn't a genius. It's not a star. It's not a misunderstood icon. It's just a person who drove away the very thing they claimed to treasure, and it lingers. That ordinariness haunts them. Not because they want to change, but because they need to believe they're special in order to function. So they scramble to rebuild the myth, maybe with a new partner, someone they can impress, maybe by overposting, overcompensating, trying to broadcast success and happiness. But it's not real, it's noise, because deep down they know, if they were truly exceptional, you wouldn't have left. If they were truly rare, they wouldn't be forgotten. And no amount of attention from strangers can replace the power of being seen, truly seen, by someone of substance and still being walked away from. That's the unspoken regret. Not just that they lost you, but that losing you revealed what they've always feared. They weren't as extraordinary as they convinced themselves and others they were. And no matter how many masks they wear after you're gone, they'll always remember the one person who saw behind them all and walked away anyway. For the narcissist, accountability is not an option. Responsibility is a threat. Blame, however, is a tool, a survival mechanism. Their entire emotional system is wired to externalize failure. Nothing is ever their fault. They can't tolerate the idea that they might be flawed, wrong, or even human in the way everyone else is. So, they offload the discomfort. They blame circumstances. They blame the world. And most of all, they blame you. Because as long as you're the problem, they don't have to look inward. As long as you're the flawed one, they get to preserve the illusion of superiority. You became their scapegoat, not because you were weak, but because you were there, present, loyal, willing to try. You absorbed the guilt. You held the weight. Every time something cracked in the relationship, they handed you the pieces and made you believe you broke it. If they lashed out, it was because you provoked them. If they withdrew, it was because you were too needy. If they cheated, it was because you weren't enough. This is the script they live by. One in which they are the misunderstood victim, and you, somehow, are both the villain and the cause of their suffering. And what's most sinister about it is how subtle it can be. Not every accusation was direct. Often it came wrapped in feigned confusion, passive-aggressive remarks, or disappointed silence. They'd twist the story, not just to others, but to you, until you started second, guessing your instincts, your memory, your sanity. Over time, their need to blame became your burden to carry. You apologized for things you didn't do. You tried harder when they did less. You walked on eggshells while they danced freely through your emotional space, rewriting the rules as they went. But then something shifted. You began to see the cycle. You started to recognize that no matter how much you tried, the target kept moving. The rules kept changing, and you realized you were never the problem. You were just the placeholder, a stand-in for everything they couldn't confront in themselves. And when you finally stepped out of that role, when you refused to carry the blame any longer, when you detached, healed, and walked away, you did something they never prepared for. You left them alone with their own reflection. Now, there's no one to pin it on, no one to absorb the emotional fallout, no one to say, "I'm sorry," for things they never did, no one to explain away the dysfunction. And that's when the panic sets in, not because they miss you in a genuine way, but because the system has broken down. Without someone to blame, the narcissist faces something unfamiliar and terrifying. The possibility that the chaos isn't out there, it's within. That the common denominator in every failed relationship, every fallout, every disappointment, is them. But here's the catch. They won't admit that, not out loud, not to anyone, so instead they spiral. They project harder. They might blame you even more aggressively after you leave, paint you as unstable, ungrateful, disloyal. They need others to believe this because it reinforces the fantasy that they are the hero of their story, and you're the antagonist who couldn't handle their brilliance, their honesty, their intensity. They may rush into new relationships, not out of love, but to prove something, to themselves, to you, to their audience. See, it wasn't me. Look how quickly I moved on. But no matter what they tell themselves or others, something lingers. A quiet, growing truth they can't outrun. With you gone, the excuses are running out. The blame has no target. The mirror they avoided for years is now the only thing staring back, and it doesn't lie. You did your part. You tried. You stayed longer than most would. But eventually you stopped playing the role. You stepped out of the story they were writing, and now they're left with a blank page, one that forces them to face a narrative they've spent their whole lives avoiding. That's the cost of losing someone like you. It's not just the silence or the absence. It's the confrontation. The end of the story where the hero doesn't win and the villain isn't you, it's them. And they don't know what to do with that ending. There is no punishment more excruciating to the narcissist than witnessing your growth after they're gone. Not because they care about your well-being, not because they suddenly understand your value, but because your healing, your rise, your evolution without them exposes something they fought to deny, that they were never the source of your power. In fact, they were the weight you had to drop in order to finally ascend. See, narcissists operate on the illusion that they are the center of gravity in every relationship. They convince themselves, and you, that without their approval, their attention, their presence, you are lost. You'll never find better. You'll never survive without their validation. This belief doesn't come from strength. It comes from fear. They need to feel irreplaceable because deep down they fear how easily they could be forgotten. And when you begin to thrive in their absence, it doesn't just bruise their ego. It annihilates the fantasy. They expected you to fall apart. They hoped you would. Because if you crumble, they get to rewrite the story. Look what happens when I leave. They can't function without me. But when you don't fall, when you start rising piece by piece, they begin to unravel. At first, they might dismiss it, call it fake, pretend you're putting on a show to make them jealous, but then it continues. Quietly, consistently, your peace gets deeper, your light gets brighter, and there's no collapse to celebrate, only growth. Quiet, steady, unstoppable growth, and they see it, even if they pretend not to. Narcissists are hyper-aware of image, and they keep tabs on yours. Maybe they watch from the shadows, checking your social media, listening to mutual friends, scrolling through your progress like a secret addiction. Maybe they see the smile in your photos that isn't forced anymore, the joy that's not dependent on their approval, the glow that says, I found myself again. And that's when the narrative breaks, because your healing is evident. It proves that the relationship wasn't your sanctuary, it was your cage. It proves that their presence wasn't a gift, it was a tax. And now that you're free, your life is expanding in ways it never could under their control. New friendships, new opportunities, confidence they never nurtured, only tried to suppress, and the hardest part for them to digest. You didn't become someone new, you became who you always were, now uninterrupted. That's what haunts them, not that you moved on, but that you did it without needing to become someone else. You didn't copy their tactics, you didn't seek revenge, you didn't try to replace them with a newer version. You just grew, authentically, quietly, inwardly, and there is nothing more threatening to a narcissist than the idea that someone they tried to break is now more whole than ever. So they scramble. They might try to re-enter, not because they've changed, but because your light is too loud to ignore. They'll disguise it, reach out under the pretense of closure, apology, or curiosity, but what they really want is proof that you still need them. That you'll answer, that they can still tug at the threads of your healing. And when you don't respond, or worse, when you respond with kindness and indifference, they're forced to confront a truth they've spent their entire lives avoiding. They were never the hero in your story. They were the detour. You didn't grow to spite them. You didn't rise to prove a point. You healed because you had to, because staying would have meant shrinking. And now, every step you take forward without looking back is a mirror they can't escape. A reflection that whispers the truth. They weren't the storm you couldn't survive. They were the fog you had to walk through to finally see clearly. And the most poetic part of all, your growth doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be broadcasted, because real evolution doesn't perform, it radiates, and they can feel it. Whether they admit it or not, they know. You are no longer within reach, not because you built walls, but because you built wings for the narcissist. Being irreplaceable is a belief so central to their identity that questioning it would mean dismantling the entire structure of their self-worth. They build relationships like pedestals, placing themselves at the top and expecting you to orbit around their gravity. It's not love they seek, not really. It's adoration, worship, devotion. They want to be the best thing that's ever happened to you. the standard by which you measure all future experiences. But when you leave, and not just leave, but live, thrive, rise, they are confronted with something they never prepared for, the undeniable truth that they were, in fact, replaceable. And that you weren't, in their mind, it's simple. You were the lucky one, the one who got to be close to their greatness. They believed they were doing you a favor by letting you stay in their orbit, that you needed them more than they needed you, and because they mistook your kindness for weakness, your patience for dependence, your loyalty for desperation, they never thought you'd actually go, let alone walk away with your dignity intact. Let alone become better without them, but you did, and now the illusion is broken. At first, they tried to minimize it, tell themselves you were never that important, that you were replaceable too. So they seek out someone new, quickly. Not because they've moved on, but because they have to replace you before they feel the emptiness creeping in. They need a new source of attention, a new audience to validate the performance. And for a while, they may even convince themselves it's working. But eventually, inevitably, they realize something they can't run from. You weren't just a supply. You were solid. You were the real thing. You brought substance, warmth, empathy, depth. Things that can't be replicated by a rebound or faked by chemistry. And as you continue forward, growing, glowing, steady, they are left staring at a harsh contrast. Their new source might give them temporary highs, but not connection. Not the depth they once had, not the challenge. Not the emotional intelligence, not the soul, and they start to feel it, even if they'll never say it aloud. You are not replaceable, not because you were perfect, but because you were real, because you offered love that came from authenticity, not performance. And once someone experiences that kind of love, even if they try to degrade it in hindsight, they know the difference. Meanwhile, their own mask begins to slip. The charisma fades, the charm wears thin. Because it's not sustainable, it never was, and when the admiration stops coming, when the new source starts to see through the cracks, the narcissist is forced to confront the unthinkable. Maybe they weren't as special as they believed. Maybe they weren't the prize. Maybe they were simply the person who held you back from becoming who you were always meant to be. That realization is devastating for them, not just because it hurts their pride, but because it reverses the entire narrative they clung to. You didn't lose them. They lost you. And not only did you survive it, you became more confident, more at peace, more successful, more grounded, without their approval, without their validation, without their presence. And that kind of transformation terrifies them, because it means the power they thought they had over you was an illusion. It was never theirs to begin with, so now they're the one looking back, replaying conversations, revisiting memories, wondering if they misunderstood the whole dynamic. They'll never tell anyone that, of course. Their pride won't allow it. But inside there's a storm, because they realize they gambled with something irreplaceable. They bet against someone who was building strength in silence, and they lost, and you didn't have to prove anything. Your life became the proof. You didn't need to chase them, expose them, or compete. You just kept becoming, and in doing so, you revealed the greatest truth of all. The narcissist was always replaceable because what they offered was an illusion. But you, with your sincerity, your heart, your growth, that was real. And that's why they'll feel your absence longer than they ever appreciated your presence. So in the end, what do narcissists truly regret after losing you? It's not just the absence of your presence. It's the absence of the mirror you held up. The one that showed them the version of themselves they desperately wanted to believe was real. And when you walked away, you didn't just leave the relationship. You shattered the illusion. You forced them to confront the chaos they've been avoiding their entire lives. They regret losing the emotional supply, the illusion of control, the scapegoat, the pedestal, the mask of exceptionality, the belief that you needed them to be whole. But the deepest regret, the one that lingers long after the drama fades, is this: you healed. You grew. You built a life they can no longer enter, and they finally realize, perhaps too late, that the thing they treated as disposable was rare, that what they tried to dominate, manipulate, and diminish was the very thing that brought meaning to their chaos. And when they look back, when the noise dies down, and the new distractions fail to satisfy, they'll remember one thing with brutal clarity: you weren't replaceable. But they were, and that truth will echo long after your silence.